our presentation today. GSI is somewhat uniquely positioned to show you, or to talk to you a few things about remote support. We've been doing remote support for 15 years, and back in that time, it was a different world. There were viruses and all that, but I don't think you had nation state, people trying to break into your systems back then, or at least they were not quite as organized, a little smaller in size. But now now the times have changed. But we've been through the whole process. But yeah, the coronavirus thing has certainly put many places in a really bad spot where people can't go into an office building. So that presents a unique situation if all of a sudden you have a single building and everybody's remote. There's things to think about, and you need to talk. Not all people are good at working from home. If you've attended one of our previous webcasts, you might have heard about some of those problems. Scammers have stepped up, trying to fake you out. I know we've had several coming. Fortunately, our software packages has prevented a lot of that. You now go from in many cases, people not too many people working remotely, or maybe a small percentage, maybe 5-10%, to now every single worker is an office, and you have instead of one building or two buildings, you now have a building for every person. Working from home, they could be accessing, and transmitting trade secrets that you normally don't want to be broadcast to the entire world. If you're all in an office where physical security is taken care of, now all of a sudden, how do you handle things? A good example, my sister works for Humana, and they have been set up to work from home for quite some time. Over the holidays, she lost her internet site, and over the holidays is a busy season for healthcare providers, everybody trying to get their last minute health checks in. So they told her she had 2 hours to get set up someplace and start working again. So she came over to the house where I have a home office. I got her set up, and boy, this thing starts fading in. I don't like this template here. You go up and then back down, because it's that fade up is absolutely a problem here. So let's go to the previous slide. There we go. But anyway, she came in, because she's a healthcare company, you can't just do VPN. They have special devices and the hookup, and it took her half hour to get everything set up. But that's because they're a healthcare provider and they have different requirements. If you're a manufacturing company and it's not a secure type of thing, might not be that big of a deal. Maybe you can just get away with a VPN setup. And data privacy is always a concern. Are they transmitting data across the net? Are people hacking, et cetera? Does this look like your router at home? My desk looks. This isn't my desk, by the way, but my Asus router looks like that, and I have one of these Philips light devices sitting right next to my router, and the question is it secure? Is there a firewall? Maybe not. Do you have like a nice little Ubiquiti $25 home device to segment traffic? Probably not. Who else is on the network? You're working from home, but guess what? Your kids are home too. Anybody that has children, they might be playing games, slowing things down. Teenagers might be going to places they shouldn't be going to. Do you have all the encryption set up? These are just some of the things that you have to make sure are set up to keep the cyber attacks from hitting you. Just to give you a couple of examples, I set up a server in Azure, just a Windows server, and I needed that server to be able to access one particular service of ours, and I'll go to the next slide while I'm talking. And before I even had that server set up in Azure, I did not even have time to get the operating system installed or get our antivirus software. I was already getting denial of service attacks. So if I'm getting denial of service attacks, granted it's Azure and it's a little bit different than maybe a home network, but you got to make sure that you're not being hit pretty hard. Here's another thing: if everybody's sitting in an office, you have a whole lot more control. You have a little bit less control over hardware choices unless you force them to use your equipment, which is a good thing. There might be wiring issues that you don't have in an office because you have a good network technician that can help you get everything set up there. And again, I already brought up others on the network, the kids playing on the net. So, you have a little less control over what's going on than you do in an office. Another biggie, and this is what we've found out, not from us, but from our clients, when they first started sending people home, a lot of people were finding out that they don't have big enough bandwidth issues. Is there enough pipe to handle it? So then you now have to use tools like Zoom. Zoom's pretty secure, but it might not meet your information security policies. And that's another thing that you need to understand is working remotely and using these sharing tools that might hog bandwidth. Are they secure for you? And you also might have voice over IP traffic here. GSI we have VoIP phones. Somebody that might have, if you have Spectrum usually gives you a phone. It's traffic that's going on your network. So with that, I'm going to let Josh Smith take over and talk a little bit and give you guys a break from my voice. Josh, welcome to the webcast.
Hey, everybody. So, as we're talking about the world changing and things changing with the coronavirus, it's not that that all these things are new, but we're seeing that these changes are all taking place so fast that people are struggling to make the changes. And some of the things that we've seen, all of this relates to security, but it may be something that that is not directly related to security, but ends up being a security issue. And some of that is the increased IT support. So as John mentioned earlier, maybe you have a handful of physical offices and a handful of users that work remotely. But now the landscape has changed and everybody is remote. And so when you have the thing that John mentioned, you had that every single user is now a remote office, that changes the way that you support them. Their locations change. As John mentioned, you have much less control over their network. You're dealing with residential class ISPs. And so it's very easy to overload your help desk. And this can be a security issue because a lot of those issues that come in could be that, they're logging in from a Starbucks or an open Wi-Fi. They're not necessarily at home. And so all of these things put an increased burden on IT support and therefore security support. Dealing with things that you don't normally deal with, their home networks, their home equipment, more VPN issues. John talked about bandwidth issues, but maybe not even the bandwidth specifically, just that the equipment that we're using, because everybody had to move so quickly, the equipment may not be scaled to the size of the remote user base. And so all these things can put a strain on the network, can put a strain on your team, and as they're trying to support both security and regular IT issues, that becomes a bit of a burden, and it's a bit of a challenge to take on this new landscape. Next slide. John mentioned voice over IP, but as you go to a completely remote user base, your users are going to have to rely on not only their desk phones, but also cell phones. And so while that's a different kind of support issue from an IT IT perspective, more vulnerabilities that we have to think about. So as they're using cell phones and they're more mobile, you have to think about what data is on those phones. If they're getting email, if they're downloading files to view, all that has to be controlled and protected. And so we have to think about things like MDM, mobile device management. If they lose a phone, or if a phone is stolen, or any endpoint device really, but what is the protocol? If they're logging in from an insecure location, what steps can you take to protect the visibility of those devices from somebody either looking on right next to them, or somebody that's maybe on the same network as them, and scanning for logins, keystrokes, and that kind of thing. Looks like we're fading into the next slide anyways, so let's let that one go. So keeping your device and your mobile data secure, some of the things that you need to think about, that we have to think about, are locking down the location. So in some cases, maybe it's that your policy right now doesn't have anything in there that says you can't log in from a Starbucks or an open SSID. So maybe you have to think about locking down the locations that, the source locations that are allowed to access sensitive data. If you're dealing with healthcare, or if you're dealing with consumer credit information, those things need to be locked down and encrypted. You may need to change your password policy. There's been a lot of debate about the change frequency, but if you're in a very public workspace and you're logging in from a very public workspace, the password frequency, or changing your password frequently, becomes more important, because those things are just more visible, and it's easier to, you're more vulnerable when you have your password being used in places that are more visible. So consider changing the password policy. Locking down portable storage devices. If you are using all mobile devices to access your data, you may want to consider, can you go back to the last slide, Joe? Sorry about that. You may want to consider locking down, physically locking down your laptops and computers, so that portable storage is not allowed. And the reason for that is that you don't want things being downloaded, sensitive data being downloaded, and removed from all of your control. So having those things in a physical location, you have a little bit more control, that you can access it only from inside the network. But we're opening up more vulnerabilities and more access to your data. So locking it down and taking further steps to lock it down are more important. Encrypting email, because you're, again, coming from locations that you don't have control over, you may want to consider using encrypted email. Many of the applications that encrypt email, Office 365 natively has this support that you can encrypt, that allows or disallows forwarding the email, and also disallows being able to take pictures, snippets, or screenshots of the email. Those things become more important as you, again, are in private location or public locations, rather than private locations that you have more control over. You can go ahead and let that go to the next one. And because of all this, your tools are going to change as well. So where you may be in the past, antivirus and anti-malware, a network firewall, those things were probably, in a lot of people's minds, those things were adequate. Now you need a lot more endpoint protection. We mentioned mobile device management, but you may want to consider enabling Windows Firewall. A lot of people disable the Windows Firewall, or don't put a lot of thought into the policy that goes into the Windows Firewall, or even a third-party endpoint protection. Enabling those things, making better use of the tools you have, and maybe considering more stringent and more thorough tools becomes more important for your endpoints as you have less control, but they're in more public spaces. Those things become more important. One of the things that we've seen an uptick as far as how popular is applications that validate your security posture prior to logging in. Devices like, or products like Fortinet, Cisco, many of these have the ability to scan your computer, and before you log in, before you actually access the VPN or the private network, they'll verify that you have the correct antivirus, anti-malware, and other tools that protect the endpoint there. Looks like it's going to solutions, and that's about it for that slide anyway. So, John, I'll let you take the reign again.
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of the problems, and we'll talk a little bit about the solutions now too. And again, this is a somewhat short webcast here, but some things you can do that if you haven't done it yet, maybe you're already there. A lot of people don't put the corporate antivirus on their employees' machines that are at home. Most people at home, the average person doesn't know how to configure antivirus. So consider using the corporate antivirus so that you know that it's set up the way you want, using a tool that you approve of. You might use Sophos, and they might be using McAfee at home. I know me as a network administrator, I understand Sophos and SentinelOne, and they're good solutions. Not necessarily anything wrong with McAfee or Norton at home, but businesses, it might not be what you're looking for. Consider making sure you use VPN with two-factor authentication. The 2FA makes the VPN encryption much more difficult to crack and break. I know that IPsec has been broken, but most hackers aren't spending their time trying to hack through traffic that's got some kind of encryption. They're mostly trying to get people to trip up, but this will help. One thing that we found useful is there are tools like Cisco Umbrella, and there are other tools. This used to be called OpenDNS, and I see advertisements for packages like Titanium that do a similar thing. They're basically DNS-based tools that prevent hacking through using bad DNS names. And between that and using Proofpoint, that really helped our profile. And they have a roaming client that you can put on your employee's desktop to roll them into your something that you control. Josh, I'm going to let you talk about the hardware devices because you got a little more experience with them than I do. So
yeah, so things like FortiGate, WatchGuard, SonicWall, any firewall that you're looking at these days that has built-in VPN as well. Most of them now are saying next generation features, and those features allow you to integrate with things like your antivirus and your umbrella and endpoint protection, so that you can have much better visibility, not just once you're on the network, but before you get on the network. So the first one there, the FortiGate, those firewalls are considered next-gen firewalls. Have a lot of features built in for SD-WAN, endpoint protection, the ability to look inside SSL packets. And so if you're not familiar with what I mean by SSL, when you connect to the bank and you've got that encrypted connection, it's encrypted so that you can't look inside of it. But because so much is encrypted, you may be sending traffic that is malicious. And so having the control over those packets through a hardware device allows you a little bit deeper inspection, a little bit more protection over your private network. So,
and some of those actually have insurance too. If you use their devices, if you are hacked, they'll offer some financial assistance as well, as does some of the VPN solutions like SentinelOne. So it's something to look into as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, so really the final thought on that is just that you want to look for equipment And a lot of times the budget is the factor, but you want to look for equipment that integrates well with your overall security policy. And so if you have unrestricted access, or if you have the ability to access sensitive data from outside the network, then you want to look into things that can validate that you have the appropriate security on your endpoint, so that you have firewall protection, you have encryption where necessary, and that you have measures in place to maintain your privacy. Validate it, and then maintain that standard while you're connected, so that when you download that information, or you're viewing that information, it stays in your private locations and it stays under your control. And so the hardware piece of that, there's not a shortage of really good quality, very thorough equipment without going into multiple devices. So things that say next gen, the ones that we mentioned here are popular because they're in a good price range, but there's others. Cisco has great products. SonicWall has great products, as well as the Fortinet and WatchGuard products.
Thanks. I'll continue. Another thing that people at home, if you're using home equipment, may not keep up to date with software updates. I mean, security updates, you definitely need to be updated if you're using Windows machines. And Linux might be a different story. You might have different policies for that, but certainly our advice is to, make sure you take software updates, especially security updates. If at all possible, and it's not always possible, just like, FortiGate may not be possible for many companies. GSI was looking to roll that out to 100 users, and we were looking at an $80,000 price tag. And we had to evaluate, well, is that, do we need that? Do we need that level of protection? Well, if we were in the pharmaceutical business or healthcare, financial, then probably we would spend that. And we put a couple of those in some offices, but you have to evaluate, is the VPN with 2FA adequate, or do you truly need the additional devices? Laptops, if you can provide a company laptop to put on somebody's home network. We also looked into rolling out some $25 ubiquity, so that and talk the employees through setting them up where the company traffic would be on an isolated network from the rest of the home traffic. Always a good idea. Again, another small investment. They're only $25. They can be useful. Just a few other things that we've been reading around. When you're in the office, you can just shout over to somebody, take a walk, and go talk to them. But now you can't do that. A lot of people are just sending text messaging. And you need to make sure it's secure. Not everything is, but text messages can be intercepted if you're sending data over them to communicate with your buds. Hey, can you look up that social security number for me, or something like that? Might not be the best tool to use it. A couple other suggestions is restrict usage from public places. Not that public places are all that available for you to go to right now. But just general good advice for the future when you can, going to sit into a Starbucks or even the lobby of a Marriott hotel or the airport. I tell everybody, don't save those Wi-Fi sites because a lot of the middlemen hackers can intercept people that have saved the networks from public places like Starbucks. And then a hacker comes in and they pretend to be Starbucks or Hilton or Marriott. Because if a hacker goes into a Marriott lobby to use his computer to do some hacking, he knows that you're in a Marriott looking for a Marriott, and you might have saved it. And restricting from those places, and trust me, they have SSL devices that they can get some of the stuff from you. It's going to be a little hard to break into, like if you've established a connection with the bank or something like that. If you're SSL, it's going to be pretty hard, but our advice is not to access a financial institution from a public place. Don't access a bank, don't access healthcare data, and that goes for people that are doing it. Josh, do you have anything else to add?
No, I think that covers covers my points as well.
Okay, now I provided something for you that was not our content. The stuff on here was our content, but I wanted, you know, in searching for material to talk to you about, I did run into this NIST recommendation for improving the security of telework and remote access solutions, and this was just updated last week for the work from home. Get a copy of this from Brooke if you want to look through that, or just Google it yourself. We're not going to go through all these. We've talked about a lot of them ourselves, but this is just so you know, a lot of what we said came from NIST and is, it's one of the de facto standards. There's a couple. There's ISO 27001 as well, but NIST is generally recognized as a framework for good security, and this is their list of goodies. So with that, Brooke, this was a short webcast, but we're gonna turn it back to you, see if people have questions for us.
Awesome, thank you so much. And just let me know when you can see my screen, John.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so our webcast, I just want to cover a few follow-up items and then we'll get into our questions and answer section of our webcast. Our webcast today is part of our free ongoing educational webcast series. And to see our most up-to-date schedule, you can go out to getgsi.com. We have webcasts for JD Edwards, NetSuite, Salesforce, ServiceNow, and BMC. And we have all of those on demand as well. The one that's currently on the screen is the one that's upcoming this week. And check out erptalk.com, which is a problem-solving forum where you can go get your enterprise application questions answered, as well as answer other people's questions who have posted on the forum as well. And be sure to stay connected with us on social media. All of our handles are currently listed on the screen, and you can see our most up-to-date posts on webcast, events, industry insights, and a whole lot more. And we do offer extensive free educational resources, which include our weekly educational webcasts, our monthly newsletter called the GSI Insider, and our online resource center where you can access our on-demand webcasts and white papers. And we also offer on-site and virtual workshops. Now, if you would like to sign up for our weekly email reminders for upcoming webcasts or our monthly newsletter, you can go out to getgsi.com, go to the main menu and click on resources and events, and then you can select the appropriate platform on the right-hand side. All right, and I just want to remind everybody that if you would like to submit a question, you can do so in the question panel. And if you minimized your console earlier, just click the left-facing arrow key on the top of left of the console, and then you can input your questions there. Okay, John and Josh, our first question today is from Joanne, and she says, do you have like a list of items that you would recommend to get started? So I'm guessing like where to start.
I would say, take an inventory of what you're using right now. So one of the things that I found is people aren't using what they have to the full extent, because there's a lot of built-in functionality with, just with Windows, for example. A lot of people think, well, this client or this application is better. It's a single-purpose application or device, and so they'll put that in place, and so they won't take advantage of, the Windows built-in feature, or they'll have a firewall that is the best-of-breed firewall, and they have a VPN appliance that's the best-of-breed VPN appliance, and so they have all these disparate devices, and they aren't taking full advantage of what they have for each of those. So I would say before going through a list of things that you could add, I would look at what you have, take good inventory of what is in place, and see what lines up with your security policy. Because the change has happened, and this is something that could be more long-term than short, your policy may need to change. And so look at your business, look at what your objectives are and what your where you're vulnerable, and then make sure your policy is in line, and then take an inventory of what tools you have in place. The things that we mentioned today, you want to make sure you have very thorough endpoint protection, which means anti-malware, antivirus, and the ability to have encrypted connectivity back to your network. And then devices that are able to verify your security posture. Even if they don't directly integrate with your antivirus, anti-malware, you want to make sure that they can check for it. So the devices that we had in the presentation, all of those have that ability. So they have integration with anti-malware, antivirus, and they have the ability to check your security posture. And that's what we consider to be, the most bang for your buck. But there are others out there, and it starts with checking to see where you are right now, and getting a good handle on your current equipment.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And a follow-up to that question, she wants to know if we have the capability to set something up to review with her and her company to look into these options, and if you guys could kind of help them figure that out.
Absolutely. If you don't have if you're not currently a GSI customer, right now, John and my email addresses are both on the screen. You're welcome to take both of those down, or one or the other. You may like John's voice better than mine, and that's understandable. He might sound wiser because he's older than me, but shots fired. So take our email address down, or talk to your rep. We've got a pretty comprehensive set of security offerings, both JDE specific and non-JDE. So we can help you evaluate what you have in place, and then we can also take that a step further to show where you may be vulnerable, and give you options for remediation that you can either allow us to help you with, or you can have your IT team take those over. So feel free to reach out to us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. She said thank you. All right. So that appears to be the end. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Did somebody have?
I just said you're welcome.
Oh, okay. Sorry. That appears to be the end of our questions today. Thank you so much, John and Josh, for your great presentation, and everybody for your questions today. And as a follow-up from today's webcast, we ask that you complete a short 1-minute survey when you exit, and you will be receiving an email with a link to our resource center on our website, where you can access a copy of today's presentation, as well as the recording from today's webcast. And if you do have any follow-up questions for us, our contact info is currently listed on the screen. And after today's webcast, we will do the drawing for the $25 Amazon gift card, and anyone that attended the entire webcast will be eligible. And we hope that you stay safe, and thank you again for joining us today, and thank you to John and Josh for your presentation.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Bye.